Today, something I find very interesting, the story of a Chinese family who operated a hand-wash laundry in Macon, Georgia from the 20s to the 1950s. The catch, they were the only Chinese in the entire city. We'll hear that story and more today on Bay Area People. Please stay with us.
Bay Area People, sponsored in part by Wells Fargo, building better communities together.
Well, from the late 20s to the early 50s, the city of Macon, Georgia had a population composed of whites and blacks. The one exception, a Chinese family who owned and operated a family laundry business in the heart of downtown Macon. This true story is told in a new book called Southern Fried Rice, A Life in a Chinese Laundry in the Deep South. I'd like to welcome his author, John Jung, to Bay Area People. Thank you for being here and for sharing your story. Yes. It caught my attention because I have relatives that came from the South, and people always say, how did the Chinese end up in Mississippi or Georgia or Alabama? So let me ask you very quickly, your family was there in the 1920s. Right. How did they end up in Georgia?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I've been doing research on this, and it's a question of when you leave China, you need to go somewhere where someone will help you. So it's really how did their relatives get there first. And we had a number of relatives living in the South, and I think some of those people may have been related to people who worked on the Augusta Canal during construction after the railroad was built in the U.S. And there were just a few families throughout the South.
And as we know, when whoever the first generation of Chinese immigrants who came to the United States, they were able over time bring a few family members to come over to help them. So that's how the population kind of grew. And your father decided to go into somehow the laundry business.
Yes, because his uncle had a laundry, and so when my father came over, he didn't have any work, so he became an apprentice and then eventually took over the laundry.
There's a lot of stereotypes about Chinese and laundries. But we also know the Chinese went into business with the laundries, groceries, and restaurants.
Right.
So you were saying that when you started looking into this, there was not a lot written about the Chinese in the laundry business.
That's true. And most of what was written was about places like Chicago, where there were a large number of actual laundries there, but they were mostly run by bachelor laundrymen. People who either had families left in China or they actually were bachelors. In the Deep South, actually most of the people I knew, they did have families. They either went back and got married in an arranged marriage and brought their wives over, or they had families in China that they eventually were able to bring over.
And that's what happened. Your father came here, went back to China, married your mom, came back.
Exactly. And
you ended up being born and raised in Macon, Georgia, as the only Chinese family in that city, and that's kind of outstanding. And you can't even conceive nowadays with the diversity of population that you were the only Chinese family there.
Yeah, it is kind of strange.
Yeah.
And when you're a little kid, you don't quite realize it initially, but as I got older, I thought about it. It really was kind of unusual.
What was it like being the only Chinese family?
Well, there was isolation, certainly, and probably more so for my parents than for me, because I knew English and had friends who were, both white and black. So at the same time, my parents wanted to teach me about Chinese values and customs, and there was really no one to relate to. So it was
One would assume that there'd be even at least one Chinese restaurant, but...
No, not really, because the restaurants came along later than the laundries did.
Okay.
The laundries were probably the very first big thing that the Chinese got into, and the restaurants came along much later.
And you were saying in your book that, we're talking about the Deep South back in, the 20s to 30s, 20s and 50s. And you were neither accepted as being white, but you were not necessarily rejected as being black. So you were kind of in the middle.
Yeah, we were closer to being treated as white, and that's probably because we were the only family there. And so we were regarded more as individuals than if we were in a community with hundreds or thousands of Chinese.
It's always fun to look at family pictures, and you brought some. So let's take a look at a little bit of this. And the family laundry was actually in downtown.
Absolutely right.
And so this is a shot of being downtown.
Right. It's on the main business route, Highway 41. It runs one block from the main drag, and this is right in the center of downtown.
So upstairs is where you lived?
Yeah, and then above the laundry, that's where we lived, and this was very common for Chinese immigrant families to live in and above their stores.
And that's one reason why you didn't have a lot of family and friends, because you were next door to businesses.
Exactly.
As opposed to being a residential area.
Yes.
Now, this is another storefront.
This is a picture of a laundry that my uncle in Atlanta had, and it actually is still operating now by his grandson. It's one of the few Chinese laundries that really still exist, you know.
Amazing. It doesn't look like this now.
It does.
It
That
does.
picture I took 2 or 3 years ago. It's
My gosh.
in Atlanta and still functioning.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, the next one is, oh, no, this is a family picture.
This is a picture taken on the occasion of when we met Madame Chiang Kai-shek. Believe it or not, she came to Macon for an honorary doctorate because her sister had gone to Wesleyan College in Macon. And this was 1943, and this was the historic visit of Madame Chiang Kai-shek when she came to address the U.S. Congress. And she came all around the country to try to raise money for the war effort. And we were paraded out because we were the only Chinese children in town. And
so obviously you had to meet,
yes.
actually you have to meet Madame Chiang Kai-shek.
Right.
Okay, and your dad?
This is my dad, and this is right across the street from the picture you showed earlier of our laundry in a little park right across the street. It was probably a real hot summer day, and he needed to get out of the laundry and just take a break. And
Oh, I can
cool
imagine
off.
how oppressively hot it was in Georgia in the summertime with humidity.
Exactly, and being in the laundry as well.
This is your mom.
This is after they retired and moved to San Francisco, and my mom ran a laundromat for several years while my father stayed behind in Georgia for a few more years before he moved out.
Okay, so then the family came out here, and your father stayed behind just to support them.
To raise money to
Right.
support the family.
This is the front of the store.
Yeah, this was when I was, what, 8, 9, 10, and I had aspirations of being a Major League Baseball player, which never materialized, but that was my, goal in life.
And what's funny is that it says Lee Laundry.
Samly Laundry.
Samly Laundry,
Right.
but the family name is not Lee.
That's correct. The family Americanized name was Jung, the paper name, so-called paper name. The clan name in China was Lao or Lo. But Sam Lee, I found out from my parents, really is not a person's name. There are a lot of Samly laundries, but Sam Lee is sort of a Chinese word that reflects prosperity. That this laundry will bring prosperity. It's not really a man named Sam Lee.
Okay, but everybody kind of assumed that it was the Lee family, right?
Right. My father was always called Sam. Yeah.
Okay.
By all the
Well,
customers.
there's a lot to talk about, and we've run out of time, but I hope everybody picks up a copy of the book, because it really is an interesting piece of history, American history at that. Chinese American history, and what happened back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s and 50s, and how one Chinese family survived Macon, Georgia.
Yes, well, I enjoyed coming, and certainly it is true. That's a different kind of story than the story of the Chinese in California or San Francisco.
Exactly.
And that's why the book was written.
Exactly. Thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Okay, coming up next, are you a bargain shopper? Then you don't want to miss Northern...
Previously on American Idol. Your votes decided who